Welcome. We're back to the lectures and let's continue part 4 of module 1. Part 4 of module 1 talks about stages or aspects of taxation. It's part of the coverage of the bar. So we have levy, and levy was not the subject of our exams from 1964 up to 2019. But what is levy? Levy is the imposition of the tax of the taxing authority. And you know very well by now that the taxing authority is the Congress or the legislative department. What about assessment? Also, no problem was given with respect to the definition of assessment. However, when we talk about the other concepts in the other modules, specifically tax remedies under the NRC and judicial remedies, there will be lots of questions involving assessments. But what is meant by assessment? Assessment is determination of the amount of tax to be paid or determination of the value of a property subject to tax. It is usually the executive department that now makes the assessment. What about collection? Collection was the subject of a tax only once in 2011. And what is meant by collection? Collection is nothing more than the means, process, and method implementing the tax law for the purpose of satisfying the tax obligation. It is the actual effort in obtaining payment of the tax. What type of bar question was asked? We have a multiple choice here. And take note, I doubt it if you're going to have a problem, ask using the multiple choice in your examination. But even then, you might be an undergraduate student and your professor might want to use the multiple choice method. In that case, what I would suggest that you do is that you look at the STEM, and the STEM here is what the examiner wants. For example, the actual effort exerted by the government to effect the exaction of what is due from the taxpayer is known as what? Of course, it's known as collection. The answer is D. Same thing also, the definition of payment was not the subject of bar exams from 1964 to 2019. What about payment? What is meant by payment? Payment by the taxpayer of the tax is satisfaction of tax burden by whatever means that are available to him under the law. Generally, the payment is in money, generally, but there are certain instances when payment could be in kind, and we'll talk about that later on. So, payment in kind was the subject of our exams twice, 2009 and 2013. So, I would suggest that you look at this carefully because this might be a question asked in the bar examination that you're going to take. So, we said generally, payment of taxes are made in money. But there are certain instances when payment of a tax in kind may be allowed. But remember, this is merely discretionary on the part of the BIR whether to accept payment in kind. So it's not prohibited. There's no law that prohibits it. There's also no law that provides for it. So again, subject to the discretion of the Bureau of Internal Revenue. However, there are some authorities that say that payment in kind is not allowed because taxes are pecuniary burdens. In short, they should always be paid in money. And furthermore, the admissibility concept and the principles of a sound tax system may be affected because of valuation problems. I have personal experience insofar as payment of tax in kind is concerned. When I was still plant operations manager of Ford Philippines, it was the old Ford, not the new one now. Uh, we were allowed to pay our taxes in kind in the form of automobiles. But why were we allowed to do so? We were allowed to do so because we ran out of cash, because the cash money that was supposed to be paid to the Bureau of Customs and the Bureau of Internal Revenue were, were in fact misappropriated by some employees of Ford Motor Company. So in order for the BIR to collect taxes, they accepted payment in the form of Ford Granadas and Ford Racers. So during the time of Marcos, most of the cars used by the executives in the administration were not Mercedes-Benzes, they were Ford Granadas. So let's look at some bar problems that have been asked in the past related to this and how were the questions couched, true and false. Answer true if the statement is true or false if the statement is false. Explain your answer in not more than 2 sentences. A law that allows taxes to be paid either in cash or in kind is valid. So true, there is no law that prohibits or allows it. It may be allowed under the Laplace theory to ensure the inflow of revenues into the coffers of the government. Supposing there's no limit as to the number of sentences, then your answer is going to be more extended. And this is how your answer should look like then. What about refund? We have the last stage, refund. And what is refund? Refund is nothing more than the return made by the executive department of payments that are excessive, illegal, or mistakenly paid. That's the meaning of refund. Some authorities do not include refund as one of the stages of taxation. Again, note, there were no questions asked on the definition of refund. Definition, but to repeat, when we talk about the other modules, specifically the tax remedies under the NRC, then you would notice that we'll have problems involving refund. Just take a, now. To repeat, what are the stages of taxation and what questions have been asked in the past with respect to this? Two questions were asked, 65 in 2006. That's why I say have a look at this carefully because it is probable that you might have a question asked. So let's go back and have a look at it. So first you have levy. We explained what is the meaning of levy. Then you have assessment, payment, collection, and finally refund. So what question has been asked here? It's an objective type. But the objective type was asking only for 3 stages. It was not asking for more, only 3 stages. So write only 3 stages, specifically here, you write levy, assessment, collection, and payment. You must combine some of them. So, since there is a limitation with respect to the number, this is what I suggest, how we're going to address it. So, there are 3 stages according to the question. So, you combine. What about if there's no limit with respect to the number? Then this time you write the 5 stages of taxation, stating specifically the meaning of each stage. So collection, payment, refund. What are the requisites of a valid tax? True, this is an old area, but for a clear understanding of taxation, I would like you to remember the requisites of a valid tax. Remember, I'm not forecasting this, but you need to know this in order to be able to understand the concept of taxation. So you must know the requisites of a valid tax. First, under the concept of territoriality, a valid tax should be within the jurisdiction of the taxing authority. Second, the assessment and collection of certain kinds of taxes should be for a public purpose. And these are the same as the inherent limitations of the power of taxation, which were discussed in Module 2, but not in this lecture. Third, the rule of taxation shall be uniform and equitable. That either the person or the tax itself guarantees against injustice, especially by way or notice and opportunity for hearing. But remember, the notice and opportunity for hearing is a judicial concept the moment the tax is going to be collected. The proper procedure for its enactment must be observed. So in short, uh, it must be originating from the appropriate branch of government, and specifically here from the House of Representatives. It could not emanate from the Senate, as we shall discuss in Module 2. So, what barrier type would you expect here? Notice is million enumeration, and therefore, since million enumeration, I would suggest that you just try to recall the concept and then use the horizontal and vertical method. So here, you have two suggested answers here. Answer A, if you know the question answer very well, then what I suggest is that you use the vertical type, so that the examiner could easily see that you've included all the elements of the concept. On the other hand, supposing you've forgotten, then you use the horizontal type. Do not use the vertical type and numbering because it will expose what's lacking in your problem. So here, the horizontal type. If you read the horizontal type carefully, you will notice that one of the requisites is missing. But the examiner will never, I think, know that. He will not notice that. Because since you have, the answer that's quite long, then you might just forget all about it. So if it's more than 5%, then as usual, I suggest that you expand your answer. Uh, the different kinds of taxes have been the subject of a solitary bar exam in 1967. It's nothing more than an objective type, so there's no need for us to look at that. But how are taxes classified? Taxes are classified according to object or subject, according to burden or incidence, according to tax rates, according to purposes and authority to impose, as well as according to graduation. So we'll talk about them one by one. First, what are the different kinds of taxes classified according to subject or object? There are three of them. Personal, poll, or capitation. That's number one. Number two is property, taxes on property. And the third will be excise taxes. A personal poll occupation tax is one that is imposed on a per head basis. It's a poll tax per head basis, such as, for example, the community taxes. When you want to obtain your community tax certificate, then you pay your community taxes. It's on a per head basis. And for the subject or object, is an individual, whether it be a natural person or juridical person. Upon the other hand, you have taxes on property, on the privilege to use property. And then the third one are excise taxes. These excise taxes are taxes imposed upon the privilege to do something. For example, to engage in business. What about the classification here? How many times has this been given in the bar? Only once. And the question was this: what are the classes or kinds according to the subject matter or object? And just nice to know. Now, what about classification according to burden or incidence? Have a look at it because I think this is a bit dangerous for you. Taxes may be classified in accordance to burden or incidence, whether they are direct or indirect taxes. So let's look at the instances when questions were asked in the back here. Supposedly only twice, but I said supposedly because there are other areas related to the classification as the burden or incidence where bar questions have been given, as you shall see in a little while. So, what are direct taxes? Direct taxes are those where the burden could not be shifted anymore to a third party. So the one who pays the taxes bears the burden of taxation. Such as, for example, most of the personal taxes, most of those paid by individuals are direct taxes. For example, you have income tax, estate tax, donors tax. So also there are some taxes paid by corporations or juridical entities that are direct taxes because they could not anymore pass it on to their customers. Upon the other hand, You have indirect taxes. Indirect taxes are those where the burden could not be shifted or transferred anymore to a third party. And consequently, almost all kinds of business taxes are indirect taxes because the burden could be shifted upon the ultimate consumer. And they include, among others, value-added taxes, excise taxes, documentary stamp taxes, and other percentage taxes. So, what questions have been asked in the past related with this area? Well, you have a simple objective type. No need to be particularly concerned about this one, but just have a look at it. So again, he said if less, 5% or less, then vertical type and answer should be short. Now, what about if it's more than 5%? Then expand it if it's more than 5%. Let's look at the distinction between direct tax and indirect tax. Watch out for this because I suspect this may be a probable for the bar examinations you're going to take. So, how are indirect taxes distinguished from direct taxes, indirect taxes? Proceeding from the definition, in a direct tax, the burden of taxation falls directly upon the taxpayer and may not be shifted to another. While in an indirect tax, the burden of taxation may be shifted or transferred to others. That's the first point of distinction. The second point of distinction is that direct taxes are usually personal taxes due from natural persons, such as income taxes, while indirect taxes are usually business taxes due from juridical persons, such as value-added tax, etc., etc. So, what question has been asked here in the past? When you look at this is nothing more than a theoretical discussion question, which include, among others, an enumeration. That is why you use the horizontal or vertical type. Let us look at tax pyramiding this time. The meaning of tax pyramiding is simple. It's nothing more than a tax imposed upon a tax. In short, the tax you paid is still going with the subject of another tax which you shall again pay. Of course, this is invalid and illegal. And my example, remember I said my example of tax pyramiding is the value-added tax on imported articles that are imported by an end user. Why? You will find out later on when we talk about value-added taxes in another module that the basis for computing the value-added tax for imported articles include, among others, the customs duties that have been paid upon the importation of the articles. So you're going to pay a value-added tax on the same articles that was already subject to the payment of customs duties, and the customs duties is added now to the base for computing value-added tax. That is my illustration of a tax upon a tax. Now, the other authorities believe that the VAT is not a tax pyramid. Why? Because according to them, the burden could be shifted. But I said, if the importer is direct user, then to my mind, that is a tax pyramid and nothing else. And should be considered, again, as invalid. There's a solitary question asked in 2006. So, let's have a look at the concept now. It is, as I said, the practice of imposing a tax upon another tax. In this situation where some or all of the stages of distribution of goods or services are taxed, with the accumulation borne by the final consumer. There is tax pyramiding when sales taxes are applied to both inputs and outputs, thus shifting the burden to the ultimate consumer. Remember, this is a foreign authority talking here, not a local authority. Tax pyramiding has no legal basis. It has been rejected since 1922 by the Supreme Court, the legislature, and our tax authorities. It is prohibited as a taxpayer cannot be compelled to pay a tax on the tax itself. So that's why I said somebody should question the constitutionality of the value-added tax on imported articles, using as a basis to include the customs duties and other taxes upon the importation. It violates the principle of uniformity and neutrality. What questions have been asked here in the past? Simple. It's just an objective type of question. What is tax pyramiding? And you would have to look at whether this is 5% or more than 5%. And how are taxes classified according to tax rates? They could be specific, ad valorem, mixed, or compound. What is a specific tax? A specific tax is nothing more than a tax that is computed upon a unit of measure. Per piece, per dozen, per kilo, that is a specific tax, or per proof liter. On the other hand, when you talk about ad valorem tax, it is a tax imposed upon the value of the articles. So, what about mixed or compound? Well, it's self-explanatory. It may be that the tax is 10 pesos per piece plus 20% ad valorem. Under current law, I have not seen any imposition anymore of mixed or compound taxes. There is none. So, what about taxes classified according to tax rates? There have been number questions asked from this area from 1964 up to 2019. So just have a look at it, just nice to know. What about the classification of taxes according to purpose? Well, it could be general, fiscal, or revenue. The purpose to raise revenue, or special or regulatory, in which case it's both an exercise of police power and the power of taxation. There was only one time whenever a question was asked on this. It was in 1965, so I doubt it is very. Just keep an open mind about this. You don't have to exert extra effort here. So what are the different classes of taxes according to purpose? Same thing, answer in the red preceding discussion, and use also the better. Let us classify taxes according to graduation. According to graduation, taxes are progressive, regressive, or proportionate. This area is not very popular for the bar exams because from 1964 up to 2019, there have been no questions asked in this area. What do you understand when you say there is a progressive system of taxation? We have a definition that's been made by the Supreme Court in 2005. Taxation is progressive when its rate goes up depending on the resources of the person affected. To my mind, that particular definition is not an adequate definition for progressive taxation, but you could use that for the bar. Because the moment you talk about a progressive system, you're talking about it in relation again to the tax bracket. You could not use that independently without referral to the tax bracket, and it should not be confused with the proportionate system of taxation, which we shall discuss in a little while. Progressivity is not repugnant to uniformity and equality. Why? Uniformity does not require that things which are different should be treated in the same manner. In short, the law allows for a valid classification. And as I mentioned to you a while ago, that whenever there is a tax measure that is enacted, there is always a discrimination. And the problem now is determined whether or not the discrimination is valid. One group is required to pay the tax, the other group is not required to pay. But in order to be able to know whether in fact that is a valid justification, you must call to mind always the requisites of a valid classification, which we previously discussed. To recall to your memories here, the requisites are: number one, there must be substantial distinctions between the subject and object of taxation. Second, the distinction must be germane or related to the issue. Number three, the classification must not be applicable only to existing conditions, but to future conditions as well. And lastly, the distinction or the differentiation must be applicable to all members of the same class. And therefore, if we have that, the differentiation now is not going to be arbitrary. So, therefore, progressivity is thought out to be one of the methods of classification. The state, of course, has the inherent right to select subjects and objects of taxation. What is meant by the proportional system? Let's, let's discuss this in relation to the progressive system of taxation. Under the proportional system, the tax increases or decreases in relation to the tax bracket. So in short, if the gradation of the tax bracket is by 10 points every 10%, there is an increase. The tax also should increase by the same percentage points, 10%. On the other hand, when you talk about a progressive system of taxation, then as the income goes higher, the tax bracket also changes, not in proportion to the income. So it could be first 10%, and then second 20%, and then 30%, etc., etc. So that's the point of distinction between a progressive system of taxation and a proportional system of taxation. The last one is a regressive system of taxation, where the tax decreases as the income of the taxpayer increases. So another part of your coverage would be the general concepts of taxation, and there are so many of them. And I suggest you have a particular look at this because, to my mind, these will be dangerous areas for the bar. So you have again prescriptivity of tax laws, imprescriptibility of tax laws, status of taxation, double taxation, escape from taxation. The favorite of bar examiners, as you will find out later on in our discussion, is double taxation. Never enter the bar examination room without having mastered all the elements and concepts of double taxation. You also have the exemption of taxation, then you have the doctrine of equitable recoupment, etc., etc. So, the prospectivity of tax laws was the subject of a bar exam in 1979 and 2007. Is this dangerous for the bar? Well, semi-dangerous. Just have a look at it because it was asked in 2007. It's now the decade of the 2000s. That's why in my forecasting technique, I go by decades. Now, in the 2007 case of Acosta, the Supreme Court held that tax laws are not to be applied retroactively. What is the reason for that? Because a retroactive application would violate the taxpayer's due process rights. It would not violate a law that does not exist. So again, there's no retroactivity. What is the effect of a repeal of a revenue law on a previously assessed tax? There's no effect. Why? Because the previously assessed and demanded tax may still be collected. The repeal is to be construed as an exemption that must be strictly construed. After all, tax laws do not have any retroactive application, even if favorable to the taxpayer, because tax laws are not considered as part of remedial or criminal law. What questions have been asked here in the past? It's nothing more than a simple question asking you to recall what we discussed previously. So, again, you have the usual 5% or less, short answer, and then you have the 5% or more expanded answer. What about the application of rules and regulations? This time, there are certain exceptions when there could be a retroactive application of rules and regulations, even if it would be prejudicial to the interest of the taxpayer. Just for example, when the taxpayer deliberately misstates or omits material facts from his return or any document required by the Bureau of Internal Revenue, then there could be a retroactive application of an adverse ruling of the Bureau of Internal Revenue. But the facts subsequently gathered by the BIR are materially different from the facts on which the ruling is based, then again, retroactive application. So also, when the taxpayer acted in bad faith, it could also be a retroactive application of the BIR rulings. Now, do not be confused here. Remember, if it is a tax law, there could be no retroactive application. If it is a ruling or regulation, general rule also no retroactive application. But then the provisions of the NRC recognizes instances when there could be a retroactive application of BR rulings and regulations. Tax laws are generally imprescriptible. Why so? Because of the Lapland doctrine. Because if tax laws are allowed to be prescriptible, then again, the government will not be able to collect taxes, such that the taxpayers would claim that the right of the government to collect is already prescribed, and therefore the lifeblood theory would suffer. There will be lesser tax revenues. But that is only a general rule, because there are instances when tax laws provide for prescription insofar as collection of certain taxes are concerned. And why do you have these exceptions? So, for example, you have prescriptive periods under the NIRC, prescriptive periods under the CMTA, and various tax laws. But let's go back. But why is it that the tax laws provides for rules of prescription, even if we say that general rule is that tax laws are imprescriptible? This is so in order to provide due process to the taxpayer and prevent the BIR from abusing this otherwise plenary power of taxation. So after a certain period of time, the government is already stopped from collecting taxes. So remember the general rule, also remember the exception. But is that important for the bar? So the general concept of prescriptibility is not important for the bar. However, when we talk about tax remedies, that's the time again you will have questions on prescription, and that's the time you must master the periods of prescription for both assessing and collection of taxes. So we already discussed this. We have the general rule and we also have the exceptions. That's the end of part 4 of module 1. Let's have a break, and then after the break, we shall take up part 5, situs of taxation, and take note that's one of the important concepts of taxation that you should take note of and master. So enjoy your break.